Hello everyone, this is part 5 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
So how do you feel? Narrowed violet eyes looked across the clearing at pupilless teal ones for a second. Gaara looked down for a moment, staring at his hand as he turned it back and forth before looking back up at the blonde across from him. It is hard to explain. Is the world always so quiet for you? Naruto just gave a small smile before wincing, clutching his stomach in pain. I'm sure it only seems that way now, don't worry, I'm sure you'll get used to it. He chuckled as the redhead suddenly yawned, stretching his arms up above his head. I feel as though for the first time in my life I can finally rest. Naruto stood up with a pained wince, slightly hunched over as he clutched his stomach. He walked over to his new friend as fast as he could, which was fairly slow, and patted him gently on the shoulder. You've earned it. However, Gaara wasn't looking at him. He instead looked on as the sand armor that had parted at Naruto's touch reformed almost as soon as the blonde moved away. He blinked as a frown settled on his features. Quickly he raised an arm, palm outstretched in front of him. As if in response, the ground quivered, sand rising from the floor in a loose pillar that swayed uncertainly. He allowed it to drop, instead creating a kunai before quickly thrusting it towards his arm. Naruto watched on in interest as sand immediately sprung up around the redhead, blocking the kunai before it could come close to his skin. Gaara allowed the kunai to fall away into dust, just staring at his hands in shock and confusion. Naruto used the opportunity to walk over, setting himself down next to the former Suna genin. I do not understand. With the Ichibi removed, should I have not lost my abilities over the sands? Naruto raised an eyebrow before giving the boy a reassuring pat on the back. I thought they were your own abilities. You agreed to this, knowing you might lose your powers. Gaara just nodded, still staring at his hands incredulously. Suddenly he looked up, his eyes slightly desperate. Attack me. Naruto just tilted his head before standing up and reaching for where his shakuju rested against a nearby tree. With one solid swing he spun the wooden staff once before attempting to crack it against the boy's arm. Surprisingly, sand once again sprung up, blocking the thrust like a steel wall before it could impact. I do not understand at all, what is still protecting me? By what will does the sand move? Naruto gave a small unhelpful shrug as he sat back down, resting his staff against his shoulder so he could once again place his hand on his stomach. I guess that is something you will have to find out for yourself. Again Gaara nodded rather absently, continuing to test his obviously retained powers with various weapons made of sand. It had taken nearly all night to extract Gaara's Bayu safely. Naruto had assumed it would be similar to Sora's procedure, but he had failed to take into account the consciousness of Shukaku. It seemed the great Tanuki didn't much appreciate being ripped from its host, so it fought back. Plus, because it was a complete Bayu, it took much longer than just sealing a bit of the Kyuubi's leftover chakra. Naruto was feeling the after effects though. An intense pain was circulating his body like somebody had replaced his blood with acid. It was centered on his stomach, so he could only assume it was all the excess chakra he had absorbed. While his body had become accustomed to the Bayu chakra thanks to the slow leakage from the Kyuubi's seal, it was still an entire Bijuu's worth, which was no small amount. Right now Naruto was putting on a bit of a brave face for Gaara, but inside his Preta path was working overtime in either integrating the new foreign chakra or trying to push it into the seal. We need to check if there is any lingering chakra in your system. Once again he merely received an absent nod, as if Gaara's neck was only working on autopilot. Shrugging, Naruto placed his hand on Gaara's chest, closing his eyes as he felt out the former Jinchuriki's chakra. He frowned as he felt something there. It wasn't a remnant of Shukaku, he was certain of that. It was like somebody had almost laced Gaara's chakra with their own. He could feel it acting independently of his usual chakra system, yet at the same time moving in perfect sync with his body. It must have taken place at an extremely young age for the two to be so well integrated, and it must have been from somebody with very similar chakra, like a family member. Which gave Naruto an idea. Gaara, did you know your mother? The redhead finally looked up, jerked out of his trance-like state and only just then realizing Naruto had his hand against his skin. I was told she died the day I was born, complications due to the Ichibi being sealed within me. Naruto gave him a very warm smile which confused the poor redhead. So she gave her life in order to give you yours. I cannot think of a truer expression of love. Gaara's face soured at that, his hair shadowing his eyes momentarily. My uncle told me that my mother despised me from the moment she saw me, calling me a weak and feeble child. That was just before he tried to murder me under my father's orders. Naruto descended to a crouch next to the former vessel, a warm hand on his shoulder and a warmer smile across his features. Maybe you should choose not to believe them. I believe your mother's will lives on in that sand, protecting you. Gaara looked up, confusion evident in his eyes. However, one look at the kindly and confident gleam in Naruto's eyes and his own meek smile began to spread across his features. You have done so much for me, Naruto, and I still do not fully understand why. He looked away, staring into the forest that surrounded the duo with a new feeling welling up in his chest, hope. However, I do know now that I want to understand. He turned back around, the small developing smile still present across his lips. Thank you for everything. Naruto returned it gladly before wincing slightly and letting out a slightly strained chuckle. What will you do now? I could always use a friend on my travels. I can't promise comfort or security, but I can offer companionship at least. His response was the redhead's smile growing slightly. I think I would like that, but I will have to decline. Naruto just nodded understandingly. He shifted his staff to his other hand before extending the appendage towards the ex-Jinchuriki. Then I wish you luck as you find your own path in the world, Gaara no Sabaku. Gaara looked down at the extended hand for only a fraction of a second before grasping it strongly in his own, the sand from the contact falling to the ground at their feet. The same for you, Naruto Uzumaki. Compared with the blistering heat of the desert, a warm sunny day in Kawa no Kuni was incredibly relaxing for the walking monk. The trees around him reminded him of his home at the temple, so there was a genuinely content smile on his face as he traveled down a long, stretching road. The sky was blue above him without a single cloud in sight. On days like this all the monks would be outside, either meditating or enjoying the day with friends. So he was confused then when out of the blue the skies opened and a deluge of water began to fall from the sky. He looked up, blinking away the droplets of water that tried to reach his eyes, and sure enough the sky was completely overcast by clouds. Shrugging it off as one of those strange occurrences, the blonde just moved on, pulling the hood of his robes up to fend off the worst of it. However, what he really couldn't ignore was when it suddenly stopped, not lighten or ease up, just stop. Looking up again he saw nothing but clear blue sky and the occasional lazy white cloud, none of which looked heavy enough to rain. The whole event took about 5 minutes in total and it had the poor blonde thrown for a loop. He had never seen such crazy weather. Again he just about managed to pass it off as the local climate, however he still had a nagging feeling something was wrong. He had passed through river country on the way to Suna and that definitely had not happened before. He stopped off in a clearing not too far from the side of the road, quickly setting up a fire so he could dry off his clothes. As he waited he adopted his traditional sitting pose before allowing his mind to fall away deep into his own consciousness. Well, that doesn't seem good. For once when Naruto entered the seal he was not in the Kyuubi's cell room, he was back in the corridors. However, he immediately noticed the difference. A new pipe adorned the roof, larger than the pipes he assumed represented his own chakra but smaller than the pipe reserved for the Kyuubi's. The ground at his feet was wet, most likely due to the terrible state of the new pipe. It was cracked and leaking. Like the Kyuubi's chakra, Naruto could see the Ichibi's chakra eat away at the floor of the corridor. It was at a lesser rate, no doubt due to the decreased potency, but there was definitely more of it leaking out into his system. That could not be good in the blonde's opinion. Quickly he focused all his concentration of his preta path. The effects were immediate, some of the cracks sealed themselves up and the leaking decreased. However, doing this was difficult and Naruto was visibly straining to do so. His will was absolute though, and he lessened the damage to the point the corridor was able to begin recovering from the damage. Quickly as he could while maintain his concentration, the monk wound his way through the representative passages of the seal. It was much easier to find the Kyuubi's room once he knew what he was looking for, and soon he was staring up at the enormous barred gate. However, the pipes weren't the only thing to change. The room had grown bigger, Instead of being a square, it was now a pentagon, and two of the enormous walls were taken up by equally large gates. The Kyuubi seemed to be in its usual position deep within the darkness of its own personal cell, the other one on the other hand. No, 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 no. I was almost free. Yeeeeeaarrrggghhhhhhh. Naruto watched as an enormous tanuki comparable to the size of the Kyuubi, but slightly smaller, raged against the bars of its cage. It would slam its tail, arms and even head against the unyielding metal bars in an attempt to break free. All the while it would curse and scream loudly in increasing hysterics to the point where even the Kyuubi's eye was twitching in irritation. However, the sudden silence as Naruto entered the room was just as deafening. Suddenly the sand construct slammed both hands against the bars at once, its black and yellow eyes firmly fixed on the small figure before it. Father! Father! It's father! Father! It continued to repeat that over and over in increasingly hysterical tones, repeatedly banging against the bars at certain points. Be silent, you worthless tanuki! Suddenly the enormous mass of sand stopped, frozen in place as if each individual particle of sand had been replaced by ice. Slowly, inch by inch, it turned its colossal head to stare at the fox, red eyes meeting yellow. There was a moment of tense silence before Shizuku suddenly and without warning broke out into loud and high-pitched laughter, bouncing on its feet like a humored child. Yes, yes, this is it. The mighty nine-tailed fox is locked in an itty-bitty cage. Not so mighty now, you fuzzball. Again Shizuku broke out in hysterics as the Kyuubi growled out its irritation, unable to do anything thanks to the bars between them. Naruto watched on, unsure of whether to be amused or confused. In the end he settled in both. However, as he shifted his shakuju once again jingled and he found Shizuku's attention completely on him. Father! Father is back! The enormous tanuki sidled up as close as he could to the cage, pressing its great head against the bars to peer even closer at Naruto. Shizuku knew you would come back, he said so, but the others didn't believe him. But you're here. You're really here. Suddenly the sand construct pressed its forehead up against the bars for a moment as Naruto looked on in confusion. After a moment it backed away, looking up at Naruto with expectant eyes. Naruto had once seen the same look in the eyes of a dog waiting for food. Almost as soon as they made eye contact, Shizuku reassumed the same position, with his forehead pressed right up against the bars. Naruto sent a small glance towards the Kyuubi, who only watched the whole spectacle with disdain. Unsure of what to do, Naruto cautiously made his way over towards the Ichibi's cell as the great creature continued to look up with excitement and expectant looks. Finally he was standing right before it, looking over the expansive sand plain of the Bijuu's forehead. Finally, after a moment of hesitation, he reached through the bars with one hand and began to gently rub Shizuku's sandy head. Ah, I missed you, father. Naruto had never thought what it might sound like to hear a tanuki made of sand, the size of a building, sigh happily, he found out in that moment. After a moment or two it appeared the Ichibi had fallen asleep, and sure enough, when Naruto moved away the creature's chest was rising and falling steadily, a contented grin on its usually crazed features. The blonde walked away into the center of the room, looking at the Kyuubi as the fox cracked a single red eye at him. Do you know what that was about? The fox only huffed once, lazily rubbing its paw over its ear once before settling its head back down on its paws. Why does he keep calling me his father? The fox didn't answer even though Naruto could tell he was faking sleep, instead it just lay there. You know, I could always just ask Shizuku when it wakes up and not have to deal with you. Finally the Kyuubi reacted, snorting loudly in what could almost be mistaken for amusement, but was more than likely contempt. You would have better luck trying to hollow out the earth than get a straight answer from that insane tanuki ninja. The creature finally raised its head a little, staring directly at Naruto with unblinking red eyes. And for your information, Shizuku has somehow gotten it into his pitiful little insane mind that you are the sage. Naruto blinked at the information as he shifted his shakuju to his other hand absently, the action once again earning a twitch from the Kyuubi's ears out of his notice. It considers the sage of the six paths his father. His only response was a single irritated growl before the Kyuubi lowered its head back down. Knowing when his tenant would be unresponsive, Naruto just gave a small sigh and disappeared from the seal. Naruto looked down at himself, pleasantly surprised to find his clothes had dried in the time he had been in the seal. He got up and doused the fire, quickly moving back onto the path to continue on his journey. After only 10 minutes of walking, he happened upon a small out-of-the-way village with a makeshift wooden wall surrounding it. It looked as though barricades and various fortifications had been hastily put up, and in many places the wall had been smashed down, large holes being slowly filled in by laboring villagers. As he walked further into the village, Naruto could feel the heavy presence of depression and general hopelessness weighing down on the people like a physical weight. All around him were signs of poverty, people out in the streets huddled underneath blankets, probably wearing everything they owned. Children ran through alleyways to the side of the street, their clothes tattered and their limbs skinny from malnourishment. He looked down as he felt a tug on the hem of his robes. Looking down, he saw a young girl who couldn't have been older than 5 or 6 staring up at him with large chocolate eyes. Please, do you have any food? Internally, Naruto was in disbelief about what he was seeing. On the outside, though, he managed a small strained smile as he reached into a pouch, withdrawing a scroll. With a puff of smoke, he gave the young girl a loaf of bread which she just stared at as if it might disintegrate with a touch. Naruto gently pressed it into her hands and patted her lightly on the shoulder. Suddenly tears began leaking from the corners of her eyes as she wrapped her little arms as far around Naruto's waist as she could. Thanks, mister. With that, she ran off towards a small group of kids around her age and began to share out the bread she had been given. However, she stopped when she felt a hand on her shoulder. Looking around, she saw Naruto looking down at their little group. Please, allow me. With that, he continued to unseal the food he had gotten from stocking up in sooner, and soon each of the kids had a handful of food and were all looking up at him with wide eyes. After he had extradited himself from the enormous group glomp he had found himself in, Naruto began to continue his way through the small run-down village. That was very kind of you, young man. He looked for the voice only to see an old woman looking up at him, sat against the side of a building. Her hair was graying and messy and her skin was covered in deep wrinkles, yet her eyes still had their youth in them, sparkling just as strongly as anybody. I'm sure some of those boys and girls won't have eaten in a few days. Naruto walked over to the woman, his shakuju clicking against the cobbles lining the road. What's going on in this village? What happened here? The elderly woman just sighed as she looked upwards, watching the sky like it would rain money and food any second. We used to be a thriving lumber town. Many merchants would pass through here between Hai no Kuni and Kase no Kuni. However, the wind daimyo decided to build a highway through the country so that his travels would be shorter. Our little village was completely bypassed and was no longer the essential stop it had been. Business suffered for everybody, and soon we did not have enough money to fund a proper militia or defense. Then of course bandits came. They swooped down on us like a carrion bird picking at a dying animal, ravaging the town, stealing from everybody and even kidnapping many of the younger women from their families. As the woman spoke, Naruto's hand began to tighten around his staff, his knuckles turning white. When did they last come through here? The woman looked down to the ground, restlessly kneading her hands in the blanket thrown over her body. Today, just a few hours ago, they took off east with a few girls from the village. Her voice was dejected and defeated. It was plain to Naruto that she had given up a long time ago along with the rest of the village. He began to walk away before he felt a hand grab his robes for the second time. The old woman was looking at him with saddened eyes. You aren't planning to go after them, are you? Naruto said nothing. Instead, he just stared a moment before turning and walking off. His feet carried him through the village faster than he normally would. There was something about their air of utter hopelessness in the village that struck a nerve deep within him. Before he knew it, he had begun walking east at a brisk pace, skirting around trees, not even entirely sure what he was doing. A part of him was thinking of going after the bandits, another was wondering how he would even find them. More importantly, he didn't know exactly what he would do when he finally reached them, if he did, that was. Soon it began to rain, rather suddenly in fact, and Naruto quickly raised his hood, pulling his scarf up and around mouth to cover his whisker marks as he did so. The wind picked up a little, causing his cloak to flap around his body as he continued to walk forward at a steady pace. Surprisingly, it was the noise that told Naruto where the bandits were before his eyes caught even a glimpse of chakra. The raucous sounds of laughing, fighting, and drunken singing reached his ears even above the increasingly intense rain. It wasn't much longer after that when he found himself standing on a small ridge overlooking what was obviously the bandit camp. Fires were lit across the valley below, tents and makeshift cabins set up in circles around them. A loose wall was put up around the whole camp and the occasional guard patrolled the perimeter. Obviously they weren't expecting company anytime soon. Naruto would make sure to correct them on that. He continued straight over the ridge, approaching what appeared to be the main entrance to the camp. Two guards were lazily lounging on tree stumps, barely paying attention to the area around them until Naruto was close enough to smell the alcohol on their breaths. Hey you. One of the guards had obviously noticed the monk as he quickly scrambled for his weapon, a dull, rusty-looking sword that had obviously seen better days. What are you doing here? Get lost. His companion had been alerted by the guard's shouts and was also reaching for his own weapon, a naginator, in better condition than the sword going off its shinier metal. Naruto said nothing, just standing there with his face covered by the shadows of his hood and his cloak gently flapping in the wind. Despite his size he made for an intimidating sight with his staff and dark cloak. Kaminari no Mai. With one sharp move Naruto dug his shakuju into the soft earth, leaving it to stick out of the ground while he shifted into a loose taijutsu stance. His legs were shoulder-width apart while his arms hung limply at his sides, his head was tilted down, wet hair shadowing his eyes. Then, all in one moment Naruto's head snapped up and his eyes opened, his ringed purple eyes glowing lightly with the chakra running through them. Both arms flipped up, palms cupped lightly as he almost seemed to gesture towards the guards. Banshu Tenon. Before they knew what was happening the guards were in the air, moving quickly towards the still unmoving blonde. Before they reached him his arms lowered, allowing them to come to a sliding stop, still just about on their feet. It didn't last long. Lighting fast Naruto was between them, his body already spinning. Instead of punching his arms seemed to just move with the momentum of his body, lashing out with pointed index and middle fingers. In a few seconds it was over. Naruto delivered a few fast jabs to nerve bundles across their bodies and they were on the floor, unmoving. Hey, what did you do to us? The bandits were on the ground, various muscles across their body twitching fruitlessly as they struggled to move. His voice was hoarse and he found it more difficult to speak than it should have been. Naruto didn't even glance in the direction, striding past them towards the camp. Kaminari no Mai is a taijutsu style that allows me to take advantage of an opponent's weaknesses. Their various blind spots and pressure points are all visible to my eyes. His eyes steeled over as he walked past them, cloak billowing in the rain. Watch my shakuju, I'll be back for it later. And with that he moved past them, taking long steps into the camp. Kaneko was feeling in particularly good spirits that night, despite the rain bearing down on them ever since their raid on the town earlier. They had food on their plates and money in their pouches. It made him wonder why they weren't raiding towns every night if the reward was so handsome. He laughed as Tadashi made a joke, managing to spit some food forward into the camp circle. The fire crackled brightly in their midst, bathing the area in a warm glow. Suddenly though he felt something press against his neck, followed by a few light jabs along his spine. Unable to move all of a sudden he fell limply to the fire, half his face getting covered in mud as he slumped to the ground. Out of the corner of his eye he spotted a cloaked figure move past him, descending upon his fellow bandits with the grace of a dancer yet the cold fury of a trained warrior. He would disable everybody with nothing more than a few jabs along key areas, spinning his body in strange and unpredictable directions until everybody was in a similar situation as him. The figure stopped for a moment, rolling one of the bandits he had subdued onto their backs so they wouldn't suffocate in the mud. Kaneko just looked on in fear as the figure strode towards him. All he could see in the shadows cast by his hood were a pair of glowing purple eyes, ringed around the small pupil. To the terrified bandit it looked like death incarnate striding towards his petrified form. The assailant grabbed the bandit by his shirt, lifting him with surprising strength for his height and size. Where do you keep your prisoners? The voice that came out of the shadows of the hood was calm but had an edge like steel. Staring into those glowing eyes the bandit just felt compelled to tell him. There. In the tenso on the far side of the sea camp, I swear. The eyes narrowed for a moment before Kaneko was dropped to the ground, his limp body splashing in the mud. The man sighed deeply. Right now he felt truly lucky to be alive. Naruto walked through the bandit camp rather calmly, taking down any bandit that crossed his path swiftly. He may have only been 11 but he had chakra-enhanced speed and strength as well as his Rinnegan eyes which made him more than a match for any number of untrained bandits. Quickly he dealt with the last of them, watching the man drop to the ground with cold, indifferent eyes. There were many things he was able to forgive thanks to his master's teachings, but kidnapping people, tearing them away from their life all for the sake of money or sick pleasures, that was not one of them. He ducked into one of the larger tents in the camp only for his hands to clench into fists so tight he began to draw blood with his fingernails. Around 20 women were tied up on the ground, their legs and arms bound at the wrists and ankles. Most were asleep or unconscious, Naruto couldn't tell, others were staring at him in fear, and all of them had the telltale signs they had been crying or were abused in some way. After calming himself down, he quickly went about untying the prisoners, in some cases just slashing through their bonds with a chakra-coated hand. Okay, you're free. Go. The village is that way. He pointed back in the direction he had come from while the women just stared at him uncomprehendingly. Suddenly one of the girls at the back, around the same age Naruto was with long purple hair, stood up with a smile on her face. She wiped away the tears on her face with slightly weak arms as she looked around at her fellow prisoners. You heard him, let's go. That seemed to rally the women as they all hurried from the tent, a few of them pausing outside to look at the unmoving bodies of the bandits strewn about. Did you kill them? As if to answer, one of the men at her feet suddenly groaned, causing the woman to shriek and lash out on instinct with her foot, knocking him out. No. I've paralyzed them all for about 6 hours. That should be enough time for the villagers to come out here and deal with them as they see fit. Naruto offered the collected girls a smile as he drew back his hood, uncaring of the rain flattening his spiky blonde locks. I'm sorry this had to happen to you, but you're free now. Suddenly Naruto was swarmed on all sides by women, some thanking him profusely, others pulling him into vice-like hugs that left him a blushing wreck. One girl even kissed him before running off with a blush of her own after the retreating women. Once they were all gone, Naruto cast a glance around the bandit camp once again before walking off, grabbing his shakuju out of the ground along the way. Once he was back on the road, he turned north and just started walking, a smile playing across his lips. Kawa no Kuni was a large country, at least in comparison to the other so-called minor countries. While its economical income couldn't compare to its neighbor Konoha, it was by no means poor. With a border spanning between the lengths of High no Kuni and Kase no Kuni, it had exponentially prospered as an outcome of the peace between the two hidden villages. Trade routes through the country were developed, and places like Takumi Village and the now officially decommissioned Tanagakure became popular tourist hotspots. Its main export was lumber, similar to that of High no Kuni except where they provided bulk and quantity, Kawa no Kuni provided professionalism and quality. Expansive lumber farms of rare and sought-after trees spanned the length of the country. Taking advantage of the exhaustive river system that ran through the land, the lumber farms were able to float their cargo all the way to the port towns in the south of the country to be shipped off all around the elemental nations. Naruto stood by one such river, watching with idle interest as large barges filled to the brim with enormous logs of various color and shape floated by. Despite the hidden village of the country being officially disbanded in favor of services from whether Konoha or Suna, there were many guilds of mercenaries operating in the land. Most of the time they were contracted with protecting the barges from attack, however it rarely came to that. One barge of wood, no matter how rare, was fairly worthless to the average bandit. Naruto had been following the river for about an hour since leaving the women he had rescued to go back to their village. It was still raining heavily, causing the river to swell slightly. There was little chance of it breaking its banks though, most were reinforced against that kind of thing. Kawa no Kuni was a fairly flat land with only a few valleys towards the south of the region. The rivers that had their sources in Iwa's mountains by that point were lazy and meandering. There wasn't a single rapid or waterfall in the entire county. Floods used to be a fairly common occurrence, which was why many villages still bore the protection measures against such events such as walls and special irrigation systems. However, the last daimyo, in an attempt to bolster the country's economical situation, had put a plan into action where every river in the country had been converted into a sort of semi-canal. It had nearly bankrupted the country, but the rewards were well worth it. No longer having to pay so much for flood protection, the people were freer to spend money on other things, contributing the economy more. Of course, Naruto didn't know any of this as he lazily made his way along the bank of the river, his hood up to ward off the rain. Every so often he would pause, an amused smile on his face before continuing on, the soft sound of raindrops and the lap of the river against its banks accompanying his walk. Were you ever going to work up the courage to come out? Naruto almost chuckled as he heard a startled eep from somewhere behind him. Well, 2 trees behind him to be exact. He turned as a young girl sheepishly poked her head out from behind the large oak, a blush on her cheeks for getting caught. How long did you know? Naruto just gave a small smile as he leaned against his staff, surprising the girl when it didn't sink even an inch into the rain-softened ground. What? That you were following me ever since the bandit camp? The girl hung her head a little. In retrospect, she should have probably figured it would be hard to sneak up on somebody capable of taking down an entire bandit camp without a single casualty. I didn't mean to be sneaky or anything, I was just nervous. Naruto merely maintained his small smile. Why didn't you go back to the village with the others? Suddenly he recognized the girl. She was the one who rallied the others back in the camp. She had long flowing purple hair that was free to flow down her back in a wave and vibrant turquoise eyes. On her body was the tattered remains of what was once probably a rather pretty dress that was now covered in tears and dirt that was gradually being washed off by the rain. Well, she began to nervously wring her hands before looking up with a hopeful expression. I want to learn how to do what you can. Naruto blinked in surprise before frowning as he noted the occasional shiver run across the girl's body. He was wrapped up in his cloak so he didn't notice, but thanks to the rain it had become rather cold. Here. He removed his long billowing cloak, allowing the girl to see the monk robes he wore underneath, before holding it out to her. Immediately his hair was flattened against his head and his clothes began to soak, but he quickly circulated fire chakra through his body for warmth. The girl just looked hesitantly at the cloak before accepting it with a gracious smile. Thank you, I'm Shizuku by the way. Naruto cocked a brow. It was a fairly unusual name, especially for a girl. Naruto, that's a strange name. The girl blushed again as she pulled the large cloak over her considerably smaller frame. Yeah, it was given to me by the lady who ran the orphanage. She looked up and saw Naruto's sympathetic look, which only seemed to redden her blush. I don't know what happened to my parents, but I was found as a child unconscious in front of the village. I don't remember anything before then. Naruto gave her an understanding smile as he moved closer, bringing the both of them underneath the protection of a large bough. I was an orphan too. I ran away from my village when I was young. He paused for a moment, looking like he was going to say more but thought better of it. I was found a few days later by my senpai Chiriku and lived in the fire temple ever since. Shizuku finally seemed to notice the boy's staff and robes as her eyes widened in understanding. So you're really a monk? Naruto nodded once and the girl slumped slightly against the tree. Wow, I thought you must be a ninja or something from the way you took down those bandits. She looked at him incredulously for a moment, her long purple hair splaying across her face as it moved with the momentum of her head. Aren't monks just supposed to go about preaching and praying or something? Naruto gave a short laugh as he sat down on the wet ground. He was wet anyway, so a bit more wouldn't hurt. I get that a lot. Monks and shinobi both develop the use of chakra within their bodies, however the difference lays in the goals. Shinobi train purely to fight or to aid in fighting so they can complete their missions and get paid. Monks train to use chakra so they can better understand themselves, however this requires both mental and physical training. Learning taijutsu is the easiest way to go about this. Shizuku nodded dumbly, only really following half of that. But the way you took down those bandits. Naruto stood up, quickly walking up the tree they were next to, which was amazing enough as it was. He proceeded to rip a rather large branch from the tree with obvious ease before dropping back down with no visible injury. Understanding chakra and learning to mold it gives one certain advantages like enhanced strength and speed, but it is only a byproduct of our training. In a fight with a trained ninja, the monk will more often than not come out the worse for it. Shizuku looked down, disappointed by that slightly. Naruto caught that as he sat back down. This time the girl joined him. But why do you wish to learn what I can do? The blonde was mildly surprised when he saw a look of intense determination flash across the girl's teal eyes. Her fists clenched slightly as she looked off into the trees, obviously thinking deeply about something. I felt so hopeless, lying there in that tent, unable to help or do anything. I had to watch as girls were dragged off, to only be abused for the sick pleasure of those men. I wanted so desperately to help, to do something other than just lie there hopelessly. Then you came along, framed by the light in the flap of the tent. You looked so. She suddenly trailed off as a large blush once again flooded her face, forcing her to look away before coughing. You seemed so strong and powerful. She turned back to face him. I want to be like that too, so I never have to watch on powerlessly again as people are hurt. She was greeted by a warm smile from the blonde. That is a very good reason to seek power, but what then? What will you do when you have that power? The girl looked at him confused as the blonde sighed, a contemplative look replacing his usual serene smile. My master once told me that some of the worst people in the world do what they do out of love. Again he only received a look of confusion. If you loved somebody so intently you would give your life for them only to watch them die in front of you, naturally you would seek revenge. The road to damnation is paved with more than good intentions but the bones of people one steps over in their warped quest. He blinked as he looked around, the warm smile returning to his face as soon as he realized it was gone. Sorry, guess I got a little carried away there. Shizuku just looked at him with wide eyes, her mouth hanging open a little almost comically. Are all monks like you? Naruto chuckled at that, a grin stretching over his face. There's nobody like me. The girl blinked before a similar smile began to spread over her own features. So will you do it? The blonde raised an eyebrow causing the girl to sigh. Will you teach me how to be stronger? Naruto chuckled as he nodded understandingly. He seemed pensive for a moment as he slowly got to his feet. There was a long moment of silence as he stared at the end of his staff, seemingly lost in his thoughts. No. Shizuku nearly fell over at that before looking down sadly. I understand. She turned to go, shrugging off the cloak only to feel a hand on her shoulder preventing her. Turning with confusion she saw Naruto standing there with a half smile, his other hand extended towards her. I can't teach you how to be stronger, that is something you must figure out yourself. But as my master told me 4 years ago, I can give you the told to find that answer. Naruto had never felt wiser in his life, he almost felt like Chukaku when he gave one of his sagely lectures. Of course the mood was completely ruined when Shizuku suddenly launched herself forward, wrapping her arms tightly around the blonde in a warm hug. Thank you. I promise you won't regret this, I'll be the best student ever. Naruto smiled warmly as he began to walk again, Shizuku scrambling to follow him. So does this make me like your apprentice now? Naruto chuckled lightly as he walked, shakuju jingling melodiously for a moment as he turned to look at his new traveling companion. I suppose so. Alright, the first thing you need to learn about chakra is that you cannot control it. Naruto's new student stared at him incredulously for a moment. They had stopped off for the night somewhere in the north of the country, not too far from the border between Kawa and Amno-Kuni. They sat in a clearing, a small fire burning between them to dry them off. The rain hadn't stopped but the small clearing acted like a natural shelter, keeping them dry for the most part. What do you mean, don't ninja use it to do all their cool jutsu and stuff? Naruto just chuckled, running a hand through his damp hair before replacing them in front of the fire to keep warm. Using fire chakra was handy but doing it consistently throughout the day became tiring, even to somebody like Naruto. It is true shinobi use chakra to perform ninjutsu, however they do not control the chakra running through their body, they merely guide it, or at least the most successful do. You have to imagine it like water, you can try to pick it up all you like but it will just run through your fingers eventually, instead you make channels for the water and allow it to flow naturally. The only part a shinobi actively plays is molding the chakra itself from their physical and spiritual energies. At this point Shizuku had her head tilted to the side like a lost puppy, causing Naruto to sigh with a small smile. Come here. The girl blinked but complied anyway, walking around the campfire to stand in front of Naruto. The blonde surprised her however when he gently pressed his palm against her stomach, causing an intense blush to break out across her face. What are you? Shizuku suddenly stopped as she felt a warmth suddenly enter her body through the contact like a liquid spreading throughout her form. She suddenly felt incredibly strong and her senses were heightened to levels she wouldn't have believed before. As suddenly as it had happened it was gone, Naruto pulling his hand away much to the girl's disappointment. That was chakra. Naruto's words didn't seem to reach the girl, she had a lopsided grin on her face and was swaying slightly. Can you do that again? Naruto chuckled slightly as he patted the spot on the log next to him, the girl sitting down without hesitance. I don't need to, soon you'll be able to do that yourself. I might have lied just a bit, you can control chakra to an extent but not in the way you would think. Naturally there is always chakra flowing in our bodies, through special pathways just for that purpose. In most people these roots are underdeveloped so not much is flowing. In ninja they work for years in order to develop these pathways so they can perform their techniques. What I just did was guide some of my own chakra through your chakra network, opening them up slightly and encouraging your own core to begin producing more. This will start a chain reaction of sorts so that if you continue to train your pathways will continue to expand. Naruto looked over only to see Shizuku with her head tilted forward, her eyes slowly closing. He just smiled as he led her carefully over to where he had unsealed his sleeping mat. He lay down a few meters away on the ground, not minding the soft earth as a bed. He had certainly slept on worse. He figured it was better she slept now. Loosening one's pathways manually was an uncomfortable process, but this way she would sleep through it. He looked over one more time at the sheet of purple hair poking out from underneath the blanket. He had gained some company if nothing else. So where are we headed then? The two were walking through thick forests again, having woken some time after the sun had rose. Well, Shizuku had. Naruto had been awake the moment the sun peeked through the trees, preparing breakfast before meditating until his new companion awoke. It was a novel experience having to explain to the girl what meditation was and what it did. She had attempted it however briefly but found it to be boring. It was like seeing a glimpse of himself in the past. Wherever our feet take us, I suppose. The Violette stared at the blonde for a moment before shaking her head with a sigh. Is everything you say going to be a riddle? Her response was a warm smile which only increased the volume of her groan. Well, if we went via the elemental cycle I started in Hai no Kuni before traveling to Kase no Kuni, so the next logical destination would be Kaminari no Kuni. If anything, the girl's disbelief only increased as she stared at her companion in horror. Are you kidding? The land of lightning is on the other side of the continent. Naruto just shrugged with that same calming, yet unbelievably irritating smile. Peace is a journey of 1,000 miles and must be taken one step at a time. Again Shizuku just blinked before hanging her head down, an invisible rain cloud hanging over her head. You're impossible. Of course, while the rain cloud over her head was imaginary, the ones in the sky were very much real. As far as Naruto could tell, it hadn't stopped raining all night and had continued to do so into the morning. Naruto just chuckled at her response as they continued to walk in silence, only the jingle of his staff breaking the quiet. Where would you suggest we go then? Shizuku gave a small laugh of her own, her emotions doing a complete 180 as she motioned to her tattered clothing. A town preferably. If I'm going to be traveling all the way to Kaminari no Kuni, then I'll need some new clothes. Naruto gave a small conceding nod, pleasantly surprised at how quickly the girl's disposition had taken a turn for the better. It was something he had noticed about the girl. No matter what happened, she seemed to bounce back within moments to what appeared to be her usual upbeat attitude. Pretty soon they did reach a town, one that straddled the edge of the border with Am no Kuni. Thankfully it was not as downtrodden as the last one Naruto passed through. People were going about the normal days without a care. Not much attention was given to a traveling monk and the young girl with him, and Naruto liked it better that way. He normally wouldn't mind any attention he might attract because he was at least confident in his skills. However, now there was somebody with him he couldn't be so sure. He felt protective of Shizuku. Due to the inherent radar all women naturally possessed, it didn't take all that long for the girl to find a clothes shop. Naruto gave her some money out of the small amount he had saved over his time in Suna and left her to get what she needed. He wasn't sure why, but he felt as though if he went inside he would end up regretting it. However, as soon as the girl came back out, he instantly knew he should have gone in with her. What are you wearing? Naruto blinked in surprise once as his head tilted to the side in surprise. Shizuku had emerged from the shop with what very well appeared to be a Miko outfit, complete with the clean white kimono top tucked into a traditional red hakama. She also had decided to take a leaf out of Naruto's book, buying comfortable strap-up sandals with white socks unlike the open-toed style favored by ninja. Her hair was now tied back by a light ribbon the same color as her eyes, drawing it into a long ponytail. Honestly, Naruto wouldn't have been surprised if there had been a sword on her back. Thankfully there wasn't. What? You don't like it? I figured if I'm traveling with a monk I should look the part. Naruto just rubbed his forehead, unsure of whether to be flattered by the girl's commitment or just irritated. You're mistaking me for a priest again. Shizuku just blinked in confusion, almost melting away Naruto's irritation with how cute the action was. I am. That was the final straw. Shizuku tilted her head to the side slightly with wide blinking eyes, her ponytail falling with it. Naruto somehow knew she knew exactly what she was doing. It was too damn cute, so he didn't find it in him to care. It's fine, as long as you bought something else then. The monk blanched as Shizuku produced 3 more sets of the exact same outfit from behind her. His head fell forward in defeat while Shizuku had that same innocent smile on her face. Come on then, I'll show you how to seal those away in scrolls. Shizuku's face lit up at the mention of learning something. On their walk they had talked a lot about what Naruto would teach her, or at least Shizuku had excitedly speculated while Naruto watched on in amusement. They began to move on, grabbing something to eat while they were in the town before moving on to the border. Naruto was wary at this point. Amegakure was very mysterious as of late. Chiraku had even warned him about passing through there. The borders were apparently heavily watched and Amegakure itself was supposed to be impossible to enter at the moment. People speculated there was some kind of internal strife going on, like a civil war, which was surprising. The leader of Hanzo of the Salamander, was said to have defeated all 3 of Konoha's Sannin at the same time. However, despite all of this, it took surprisingly little effort to get into the country itself. It turns out all kinds of holy men were pretty much ignored as they traveled from country to country, considered harmless by most. Even if a monk or priest had power or skill, they were pacifists by nature, so posed no direct danger to anybody. There was also the fact that was secure in the knowledge Amegakure had never been invaded before outside of war. It continued to rain as they traveled, so they had to find a cave some way off from the main road before they could make camp. Naruto quickly made a fire and soon the two were drying themselves off. Shizuku was also admiring her new look in a nearby puddle, but that wasn't relevant. The atmosphere was surprisingly quiet considering how talkative Shizuku normally was. After they had dried off, she sat at the mouth of the cave just staring out into the rain. Naruto joined her after a while, sitting next to her and peering out into the sheets of falling water. It's been raining pretty heavily for a while now, hasn't it? The blonde blinked when he noticed his companion's head droop slightly, an air of depression settling over her. He had only tried to make conversation, yet Shizuku seemed to withdraw upon herself as he said it. It's my fault. He looked over only to be surprised when he saw Shizuku with tears bristling in the corners of her eyes. Naruto may have been a monk, but he was still a guy, and there are only a few reactions when a boy is faced with a crying girl. Whoa. Hey, it's not your fault. He began to wave his hands in front of himself for reasons he couldn't quite fathom on a conscious level. Hey, it's raining, so what? We're in Amegakure, so what do you expect? In response, Shizuku just tucked her legs up against her chest, wrapping her arms around her knees and burying her face in her new Hakama leggings. It's not that. Everywhere I go the rain always seems to follow me. It's how I got my name. For as long as I can remember, whenever I am outside it would always rain. The other kids would stay away from me, saying I was cursed or just bad luck. Now I've brought that on you. I'm sorry. She withdrew on herself even further, listening to the individual sounds of raindrops falling on the ground outside. She didn't flinch when she felt a warm hand rest on her shoulder. She didn't even look up. You know, a very wise old man once told me that the rain helps us see just how insignificant our own problems are. When you can walk outside as water falls from the sky, mingling with your tears to the point where they become indistinguishable, you realize that right at that very moment you might not be the only person in the world crying, and you just might not be able to see them. Shizuku looked up slowly from her knees, timidly turning her gaze towards Naruto. However, the blonde wasn't looking at her, he was staring out of the cave into the rain. Suddenly he stood up and walked outside, completely uncaring of the water drenching his body. Lightning flashed briefly behind him, framing his body with light for a single second. He turned with a beaming smile, his hand outstretched in Shizuku's direction, gesturing for her to join him. Tentatively she stood and ventured out into the rain, her steps growing more confident as she reached the blonde. He took her hand, smiling all the while as he looked up at the overcast sky. I'll make you a promise, Shizuku, as my first apprentice. As long as I'm with you, you will never have to hide your tears in the rain again. With that he raised a single hand, his eyes opening, giving Shizuku her first ever glimpse of the Rinnegan. She felt a sudden surge of unexplained energy through the contact between their hands. Shinra Tensei. Suddenly, just like that, the rain stopped. It wasn't so much that it stopped falling entirely, but above the two of them the water was suspended in the air like it was being held back by some great invisible hand. Shizuku could only watch in wonder at the physics-defying event taking place above her as Naruto defied nature to stop the rain falling. She looked back around only to find herself looking directly into Naruto's steely purple eyes. Suddenly Naruto's technique gave out and the rain began to fall again, succinctly drenching them both from all the held-back water. Quickly hurrying back into the cave, the two began to laugh at the situation before settling down next to the fire to once again dry off. However, every couple of moments or so Shizuku would cast a glance Naruto's way, trying to explain what she had felt out there, looking into his eyes. So the rain has really always followed you. Shizuku looked up to see Naruto looking at her, his eyes once again narrowed as they usually were and only a small smile adoring his features. Shizuku just nodded while Naruto became thoughtful. He looked at her again, opening his eyes slightly wider to once again reveal his dojutsu, staring at her as if he could see right through her. For a moment his eyes narrowed in confusion before they went back to normal. Your eyes? I've never seen anything like them. Naruto chuckled nervously as he rubbed the back of his neck. Shizuku was glad for moments like that. They humanized the otherwise mysterious monk she had latched herself onto. Yeah, I guess you could say they're unique. Upon Shizuku's look of interest, the blonde sighed before opening his eyes completely, abandoning his usual narrowed look for now. I have a bloodline of sorts that manifests in my eyes as a dojutsu known as the Rinnegan. It allows me to do things that others can't. Shizuku just stared at him strangely before her eyes widened in understanding as she looked out at the rain. Yes, the technique you saw me use was one of the 6 paths my eyes grant me access to, the Deva path, which grants me limited control over gravity. At this point Shizuku was staring at him with wide, gleaming eyes. She had known ninja were capable of amazing feats, but to be able to control one of the fundamental forces of the universe. What are the other paths? Naruto sighed with a small smile. You've actually seen me use another, the Preta path. It allows me control over how chakra moves, so I can absorb it or direct it into objects or people. It was how I begun to get your pathways to open up manually. Other than that I'm not sure, there isn't a lot of information available to help me find out. Shizuku nodded in understanding before frowning. Then how do you know there are 6 paths? Naruto grinned as he instinctively reached for his shakuju, taking comfort in the feel of the firm staff. The monks at the temple I lived in showed me some books about a man called the Sage of the 6 Paths. He too was said to have possessed the Rinnegan, but so little is known about him because he lived hundreds of years ago. I don't know if I will ever unlock all the abilities of the Rinnegan, but they seem to manifest at points where I am in need or desperate. He shrugged, returning to his more nonchalant demeanor. But enough delaying, it's about time we worked on your chakra control. Shizuku's groan echoed around the small cave. It was still raining and Naruto had begun to take Shizuku's story seriously. Then again he couldn't be sure if it had more to do with them being in Amno Kuni. It had been a long and rather exhausting journey through the country, mostly due to the fact they had avoided any villages or towns they had encountered. After the first one they learned that Am was currently embroiled in a rather vicious civil war. Nobody said it outright, but the signs were all there. Even in that one town people had been driven into factions. There were the loyalists to Hanzo of the Salamander. These people were either terrified of the man and his followers or genuinely believed the leader of Am was right for the country. It was true that after the Third Shinobi War Am had been left in a state of poverty and disrepair. Ever since then Hanzo had worked to restore the country to what it had once been. There were the rebels. They were much harder to spot, for obvious reasons, but their presence was no less noticeable. Propaganda posters littered the walls, many covered in the same red cloud decal that seemed to be a symbol for the rebellion. It was hushed as much as possible by the loyalists. They tore down any posters in sight and brought any suspected rebel in for questioning. These were the people who believed either Hanzo wasn't a good leader or he wasn't doing things fast enough. That wasn't what made Naruto cautious. It was seeing a certain woman that had done that. They had been walking down the street in the first town they came across after buying some provisions when a woman walked past them. She had been wearing a black cloak with red clouds adorning it, a blatant sign of the rebellion, and yet nobody did anything. People went out of their way to avoid the blue-hair woman and Naruto knew why. She practically radiated power, at least in comparison to the surrounding people. Even under Naruto's Rinnegan eye he could get nothing. Like with Gaara, a thin layer of chakra covered her entire body, making anything else difficult to discern. After that, the two had avoided any major villages or towns, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire of the brewing civil unrest. Naruto would have gladly offered his help, but people who got mixed up in wars were targeted. When those targeted people couldn't be hurt, they began to go after people close to them. Naruto had made a promise to Shizuku that he had no intention of breaking, he would protect her. So they quickly made their way north through the impoverished country. Naruto was relieved to finally see the border to Kusa no Kuni. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.